Leaves thrashed beneath his shoulders as Merrick lay upon the ground, in the supreme position, fighting desperately for his life. Even in those moments as large teeth came gnashing down inches from his face, held back by a weakened arm that threatened to give at any moment, Merrick couldn't help but think about how foolish he had been to attempt such a risky feat. But he had to eat, driven by empirical needs to survive. That all seemed pointless now, for if he died here, in this spot, he would simply serve as this perisher's meal. He didn't know what the thing was actually called, only what he called it, and to him, this name fit flawlessly. The thing snapped shut its double jaw over and over, each time a millimeter closer to Merrick's face. Taking a risk, Merrick grabbed the thick, woody walking stick from the ground beside him and plunged it forward, causing the toothy mouth of the beast to clamp tightly upon it in the millisecond before it would have buried those teeth deep into either side of Merrick's face. The girthy branch was plenty thick enough, and it wouldn't easily break, but a perisher's jaws are a force to be reckoned with, and Merrick knew he had only one chance to make his move, and had to do so quickly. Keeping both hands firm on the stick that now cracked and creaked, threatening to splinter and break at any second, Merrick thrusted both legs upward, wrapping them tightly around the torso of the monster on top of him. Summoning every last ounce of force that he could muster, Merrick twisted his body to the side, arms with stick in hand and all, causing the perisher to momentarily lose balance and fall to the side, setting off the large trap that Merrick had originally come to investigate. As the metal teeth penetrated the beast's sides, the monster roared in agony, causing the branch to fall from its mouth and giving the hungry man enough time to stand and run. As Merrick ran through the dense vegetation, he could hear the thick metal chain rattling as the beast struggled to release itself from its grip. Merrick ran harder, sprinted faster, ignoring the burning sensation welling up in each and every muscle. That chain wouldn't hold that monster for long. He knew that this was likely the thing that had been stealing his kills from the traps before he could retrieve them, and Merrick found himself happy the morning harvest had been so light. For had he caught a meal in the jaws of that trap and engaged its metal jaws to clamp shut, Merrick would have had no chance at absconsion. But as Merrick approached his camp, he heard that thick chain snap like a gunshot, and the sounds of rapidly approaching thudding steps subsequently behind him. The thing was free and giving chase. He was so close, but even so, he was unsure of any affirmed success. The clatter now thrashing through the brush behind him at the perimeter's edge, Merrick reached the ladder and scurried to its top with great speed, turning back once he had climbed to the crest of his shelter, pulling up the rope ladder that dangled to the forest floor below. The thing couldn't climb ladders, but Merrick took no chances out here. The thing stopped short just before slamming into the trunk of the tree, before standing on its hind legs to place its front paws on the base of the trunk, looking up at its would-be prey with hungry eyes. Merrick stared down at the thing that had almost killed him. The thing growled before returning to all fours and began to circle the tree in wait. Merrick knew that this thing wouldn't go away anytime soon. It had gotten his scent and followed him here. These creatures were smart, and the next time he left the safety of this tree-built shelter, he would have to devise a way to kill this beast. Taking in a big gulp of breath, letting the wave of adrenaline leave his muscles and mind, Merrick slumped down to the floor against the adjacent wall. Instantly, he noticed the drops of dark red that began pattering against the boards below him. In his haste and desperate attempt to survive, he hadn't realized that he had been injured, and quite badly. When Merrick looked at the gash in his shoulder, deep and butterflied at about 6 inches in length, the pain finally registered in his mind, and a wave of agony replaced the adrenaline from earlier. Still, despite the pain, the death he had narrowly escaped, and the need to come up with a plan, all Merrick could think about while staring into the puddle of blood that had accumulated on the floor next to him was the memories such a sight brought with it. Life hadn't always been so hard, but then again, Merrick wasn't always alone. Life as a child seemed so much simpler, and Merrick wondered if it was like that for all children, pondering as he rested wounded on the floor. It was so long ago, but he could remember them so clearly. His parents, and the little brother he barely thought of anymore. Home wasn't much unlike it is right now, still high in a tree, into the airy safety that such an elevation could provide, though his childhood home was considerably larger. Merrick had a very few detailed memories of his father, but they were also sparse. Dad was always busy, hunting and gathering for his family. He was tall, stern, yet gentle and fair. Merrick had always thought of his father as the strongest and smartest being to ever live. Mom was beautiful and kind. She very much loved her children. How much she enjoyed being a mother was even evident in the distant memories. The thing he remembered about her the most was her long blonde hair, and how she helped him should he hurt himself or be frightened by the things that howled in the night outside. Most of all, though, typically pushed to the back of his mind, too painful to remember, Merrick recalled his little brother, Keshin. Keshin and Merrick played together day in and day out. Venturing outside the home was typically forbidden, except for that of the open, flat roof, high above the forest floor. Being in such close quarters with a sibling could be enough to drive a child mad, Merrick thought to himself before chuckling out loud, lost in memories of his family and the annoying brother he still desperately missed. This was the sequence of recollections he had been trying to avoid, the memory that always followed. The day his father finally agreed to take him along for the day and teach him firsthand all that he needed to know, rather than just explaining them to him. Merrick winced, trying to push what was to come from his mind, and although it came in flashes of non-sequential events, the elements he wished to avoid were all present. His father torn to shreds. The sounds of flesh being torn from snapping bones. The sound of his breath as he ran home for help, terrified and yet calm, like reality had become surreal. Then his mother's lifeless eyes, the strange condition of her body and position, and the trail of thick crimson that led back to a larger pool of blood where his brother had last been playing. Merrick's eyes went wide with the sight, and like it was instinct, Merrick screamed as loud as he could, terrified and enraged all at once. As he did, he opened his eyes and woke up. Open eyes were greeted by the sight of a near-black environment. Night had fallen. No candles had been lit, and although he could not see it, Merrick felt the slick pool that accumulated on the floor where he had been sitting. Immediately feeling his shoulder with his hand, he found the wound had clotted shut. Still, Merrick climbed to his feet, used a pair of flint rocks to light a nearby candle, and proceeded to attend to his wound, dressing it properly. But as he was placing the beaten and worn leather tactical jacket back over his shoulder, Merrick detected something distinct yet faint from somewhere beyond his abode, deep within the forest beyond. He listened closely for a few more moments. Silence was all that answered back. Convincing himself it was nothing but the sounds of some night-stalking predator, mixed with the obstructions of walls and vivid imagination, he simply brushed it off as the machinations of an overworked mind. But then he heard it again. Now, there was no way he could simply push the notion aside. It's been a while since he had seen another child, but that cry in the distance surfaced cognitive recollections long since buried deep and forgotten. He knew that wherever this child was, the forest beyond was home to various hungry predators, some more fearsome than the dog-like perishers, some that assured doom if any were to meet one. He knew it was a bad idea, but he also knew that he couldn't leave a child to suffer such a grim fate, so in response, Merrick grabbed a long blade and a few other supplies for protection, and climbed down the ladder, expecting to see that monster, but not, before heading away from his home and ever closer to that distant and distressed sound. The branches of trees slapped at Merrick's face as he plundered through the underbrush in a direct line towards the ominous sound. He knew better than anyone could have ever known just how dangerous the forest could be at night. But a child out here in the black, facing down whatever horrors are stalking in the dark, he couldn't simply leave such an innocent to their assured gruesome demise. Merrick had rarely ever come across another human such as himself, and hadn't done so in what was actually years, so there were no preconceived notions on how a child could get out this far into the dangerous woodlands in the first place, no matter how hard he attempted to wrangle a viable reason into submission. Just as the crying seemed as if it was nearly just in front of him, it stopped. It had gotten loud enough where he could certainly affirm it had indeed been somehow a child, or at least that's what it sounded like. But as he floundered through the last few branches in front of him, the dim glowing light that emanated from behind the woody trunks before him told him that there was something else at work here. Cautiously, Merrick drew his blade and began creeping slowly now towards the source of this unknown light. Clearing the last of the flora in his way, he stopped in shock, unbelieving in what his eyes were telling him was there. There was indeed a child in the forest. At least, she looked like one. She was small, maybe only 2 feet tall. The flowing dress that flowed from her form was something the likes Merrick had never seen before. Her hair was golden and long, clean and unfrayed, and her face was that of a cherub. The incandescent blue light that illuminated the forest immediately surrounding her seemed to emanate from the girl herself. Merrick had never seen anything like it in his entire long life, and found himself at a momentary loss for both words and action. He attempted to speak, to say anything, to ask questions, or possibly ready himself for a hasty flee. But all that he managed was a few stifled noises and choking sounds as his words hitched in his throat, leaving him speechless. At this, the child had already turned to face him, had been staring him down wantingly, almost remorsefully, since he had made his presence known. And when he attempted to speak, she once again began to cry. "Hey, are you okay?" Merrick found his voice again unexpectedly, as if the words fell past his lips without effort. The child stopped sobbing for a moment, sniffled, and looked up at him, but still said nothing. Merrick was of course perplexed about a great many things that he would find no answers for right away. The fact was, they were in real danger, and whoever or whatever this was certainly was in need of help, and appeared utterly defenseless. He remained wary, yes, but he also felt a compulsion to offer at least some kind of assistance. After all, the wilds were cruel, and so, too, was most of the sparse population that inhabited them. But not him. All he wanted was to live in peace, and couldn't resign an innocent, whatever this was, to suffer. "Listen, we need to get out of here. Can you follow me?" he stuttered out, still unnerved by the eerie glowing light. The child said nothing to him, only stood to her feet and looked at Merrick with a slight innocent and reserved smile. She certainly appeared as cautious as he did. He tried urging her to hastily follow, but the girl's apprehension stifled their progress, and soon Merrick heard something that made his blood run cold. A callous, rumbling snarl emanated from somewhere in the dark before them, and though he could not see it, he knew it was there, and he knew what it was. Something about the cover of darkness made the perishers all that more formidable. Whether their nocturnal nature lent with it an added ferociousness at night, or if there was some other unexplainable force at work, he never knew for sure. All he needed to know was to stay out of the forests after dark and remain behind locked doors. He had broken this golden rule that had allowed him to live the life that he did. Without looking, Merrick waved his hand behind him, telling the girl to get back, but it was too late. A massive shape exploded forth from the underbrush that only jostled for a fraction of a second, giving him no time to react. The thing had forced him to the ground, pinning him to the forest floor and snapping its triple jaw only inches from Merrick's throat as he desperately fought to hold the beast back. He knew there was no trap nearby this time that would help save his life, and he knew that he was done for. However, amidst the struggle, Merrick failed to notice the light around them grow brighter and brighter, dimming only for a moment, before another shape lunged at both him and the beast, tackling the monstrous black-furred perisher to the forest floor beside Merrick, a sequence of actions that exploded into a symphony of violent sounds, two animals ripping each other apart. Standing to his feet, Merrick took in the sight playing out before him in the near black, and he couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. He'd never seen one before, only heard about them in stories passed through generations and onto him as a young child. The beast was large, nearly as large as the perisher itself, easily seen now as the thing stood over the beast's lifeless corpse, bits of black fur still dangling from its mouth. Its eyes were a bright yellow, and they seemed to somehow glisten in the moonlight. Its white fur strongly contrasted the darkness that enveloped them. "What is this thing? Did you do this?" Merrick asked the girl, who now stood beside him.
Okay,
Is all the girl said, still somehow dimly glowing with a bluish incandescent light. "I don't understand. These beasts are only talked about in stories and legends. How did..." Merrick started, but trailed off, somehow knowing he wouldn't get an answer.
okay.
The girl responded, pointing to the white wolf that now just stood amongst the two of them. We need to get out of here," he began again, but was cut off when the small girl gripped his hand and pulled him into the opposite direction of where he wanted to be, home. Still, his curiosity would not relinquish him to a night of rest, and dangerous as it was, he was compelled to follow, occasionally gawking over at the white-furred beast that followed them in amazement. It seemed like hours had passed, but when they reached the clearing, the world was still within the embrace of nightfall. But even in the black of night, he could see it in all its monolithic glory, and he didn't need the child to be pointing at it to direct his attention to it. He had heard of structures like this before, but again, in stories. Never in person had he laid eyes on one. The lettering above the aperture before him obviously spelled out words, but they made no more sense to him than his journals would mean to the winged Barriger creatures that circle the skies of the plains.
Museum.
The girl spoke out loud, pointing at the letters above the front entrance. Merrick had no idea what this meant, but he knew that whatever answers he sought regarding what the hell was going on here likely resided within. With heed of danger and a steady, slow pace, the trio banded together in darkness, ventured forward towards whatever lay in wait within.